Speaking of trains, we've been just powering our way through like this powerful locomotive through the book of First John, and I can't have that. We've been going way too fast and I have to way bog us down and way distract us. So I'm actually going to do the most slowing down of things possible. I'm going to look at the same exact text that we looked at last time.
Okay.
To look at stereotype and reality.
Yeah, I
wrote that down. That's what you said.
I had something I wanted to talk about last time, and I didn't really do it very well. And I think it's meaningful. I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers to what I'm going to bring up here, but I think it's a really important thing to think about in 2024 with the way, and like, I'll give you a shorthand for what I'm talking about. Those guys vote this way, so they're these people and they're terrible. And these guys vote that way and they do this and they're terrible. And so we are really quick to do this. We all do it. It's not just about voting. And I want to talk about why we stereotype, why that happens, and what we're losing when that happens. And to be honest, it's rooted right here in these verses. I meant to talk about it last time and just never did. So I thought it was important enough to derail the train a little bit and talk about it more. Before we read this, I'll talk about some of what I'm talking about, and then we'll sort of enter into the text. I think I said this last time. How many of you have ever been cut off in traffic? Is it happening more?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
What in the world?
It is.
Without signal lights.
Oh, yeah.
When a person cuts you off in traffic, and I'm going to do this in a way that's deliberately provocative. You may or may not like the way I'm about to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let's say the person is Asian. What do? I know what people do. You can hear the sort of story that comes up in people's minds. I'm not saying we do it. I'm not saying I do it. But you know that whole narrative of, well, people from Asia can't drive.
I would amen that.
So there's a whole narrative about that. Oh, there's a huge cultural narrative of that.
With them.
That is a huge cultural narrative.
In their country for 3 months.
Okay, you did.
So what happens is that someone cuts us off, and let's say it's a person of color, or a person from a certain nationality, or a certain gender. I'm not going to say genders because I'm the only. Well, Ted and I were way outnumbered in here, so I'm not going to. Oh, but it's that. So you get caught back up with the person who has cut you off. And because they're a person of color, or because they're from those countries that don't drive well and we do, or because they're the other gender that doesn't know, what we do is we say, that person cut me off, they're that gender, that nationality, that color, that person, that gender, that nationality, that don't know what they're doing, they can't drive. Right? So that's a thing that we do. Our brains do that. You may not have heard it, and I'm being evocative of a bad thing then. There is a narrative that people from Asian countries cannot drive well. There's that narrative that exists. So all it takes is a person from that looks like that, and for you to drive past it and to be like, see, look at those people. Those people can't function properly. We do it. Keep it. No, I'm gonna tie it into. I already did this briefly, and then I'm gonna come to it. When people vote for one party, they are certain types of bad guys. When people vote for the other party, there's certain types of bad guys. Whichever one we're not in, the other group is the bad guys when they vote that way. There are, the government and the church and pastors and people who work at teachers, nurses, have been making bad, sinful decisions since the dawn of humanity. So when Pastor John makes a bad decision as an ELCA pastor, the worst thing that can happen is people can say, well, I don't like church because Pastor John did that because he represents this whole group to me. Or the ELCA must be terrible because John did that. Yes, I am a part of it, but it's unfair sometimes to say, well, because he's saying that because he's an ELCA and I don't like the ELCA. You know, this sort of habit we have of trying to process information by putting things in big groups that we already have predetermined how the group is whether it's good or bad, is, I think, part of the dividing issue we have. So I said I would come back to Jackie. We're going to look at the text too.
Well, I was just thinking about the fact that in a lot of foreign countries, they do not follow their own traffic laws, and then they come over here and they do not follow our traffic laws either. And that becomes a problem because we follow our traffic laws.
I would say we don't.
I'm sorry.
A lot
Yeah.
of people don't. A lot of people don't.
I would say we try to follow our
attempt.
traffic.
I think
People in
it's
this room
scary
attempt to.
when the light turns green and you have to look both ways before you proceed into the intersection.
Why-
Always do
why-
that at Highwood and always do that at Charing
I
Cross.
do it at every
right
intersection.
outside here
I
for
do too.
sure.
Why do we
That's how we got our
why
first
do we
sign.
stereotype? Why do we make these generalizations? If you voted for candidate Z, that means you're this type of bad guy. If you voted for candidate X, that means you're this type of bad guy. Why do we do these stereotypes? Do you know why we do it? And do you know why it's getting worse? We do it more now than ever. And do you know why we do it? To me, this is a simplified thing, and I'm not going to answer all your questions today. Of why I think we need to think and be prayerful about this, though. To me, we do it because the amount of interaction with people that are different from us, like we're talking about people from other countries who have ingrained learning that is difficult to our interaction with people who have different learning, like they drive different in this state than this state, but people move more, is higher. The amount of information coming at us is infinitely more now than it ever was before. This one I do a lot. This is comes from a thing called family systems, and one of its tenets is that a library, even 50 years ago in town, could, if it wanted to, have all the printed materials from that year put in its library. So if it wanted to, it could collect all the printed materials that were put out and house it. Now, you can't, the amount of printed and not printed, but stuff that comes at you couldn't be housed in 1 million libraries. The town library used to have a newspaper that had and they could keep the back stock of that and keep all the news. They could keep books, they could keep, now more is printed a day or put out information-wise to fill the Grand Canyon a day. Your brain cannot process it. Mm-hmm. It is not possible to process. And I'm not saying we don't try, and I'm going to talk about that some. You can't process all the medications people are on and what they do. You can't process all the news, and you can't, and I can't. We can't process it. We're in interaction with people who grew up in different habits. The world, like people move around more. When you went to Arizona, people drove differently there than they do here. And then they're probably like, look at this person, you didn't have Ohio Place, but they're like, Ohio, don't they teach them how to drive there, and then the amount of information coming at us is more than one. It's like 6 fire hydrants. And so our brains make categories because we can't handle it. We make categories and then are really quick to put people in it. We make a category like this whole swath of voters has to be, has to be fascist, or this whole swath of voters has to be woke liberals, socialists. Whereas if you sit with the people, you sometimes come to the realization that they may not be either one of those things just because they chose a party. They may be that thing, but they may not. Our stereotypes are a way of processing information. And it's doing us a disservice because sometimes we're throwing out the baby of who the person is with the bathwater of the stereotype. We're saying that person can't drive, when in reality there's more of a human connection needed there. anything you want to talk about with that? That was a really quick sort of crash course of Psychology 101 from a not qualified psychologist.
Well, I was just thinking when you talk about groups and stereotypes, we're all of the age now, and I feel, maybe you guys do too, that when I'm driving, and I'm very cautious and everything, the younger ones are looking at our older ones and saying, oh, they're just too old. They shouldn't be on the road or something like that.
We stereotype age. Age is a stereotype.
Age.
One of my favorite things to talk about lately, I used to have one. Kate currently drives a Buick, and I tell this all the time, and it's true. Kate, no matter if I drive it, if she drives it, no matter what speed you're going, we get passed in the Buick. Mm-hmm. And then everybody looks over and does all this stuff. Like, I can be going 10 above the speed limit, and I'll get passed, like, I could be going 15. There's sort of this whole, like, if that person's in a Buick, they are not driving quickly enough.
Old.
Yeah, and that when we saw, and I warned Kate when she bought it. I used to drive one, and I got that all the time. Everybody wanted to zip. You could be going 20 over, and I know people do it all the time. It's way worse in a Buick than it is in any other car that I've driven. Because it's just this stereotype of, like, you must be too old to be on the road. And so people are, and you don't, and it's we have to do this to some degree because the information coming at us is that immeasurable. You wouldn't be able to function if you didn't make some stereotypes, like, I prefer this hospital over that hospital. If you tried to pick a rehab without making some stereotypes or some choices, you would never be able to do it. That's why our brains do this. But we need to be super mindful as people of faith and as people, the humanity of the people we're stereotyping, and that it is destructive to be like, well, that person is a person of that gender, they cut me off so the whole gender can't drive. And then every time you pass someone who's that gender and driving, you're going to be a jerk about it because you've made a stereotype that is taking away maybe the reality of they're in an emergency. They're late for work, which doesn't warrant driving badly, but makes people, they're in an anxious situation, which makes them behave differently. It has nothing to do with their gender, right? So what I'm trying to get to is what we do to the humanity or the piece of a person that God loves, no matter what gender or race or color or vote or whatever they are.
I would like to add something.
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
You all know my friend Cindy. She's been to various Christmas dinners and things like that.
I must know her, but I can't think of who that is. That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Cindy came to visit me when I was in Arizona. And she went to Flagstaff to visit one of her friends who lived there. She came back and she said, I am so impressed that people let you merge into traffic as easy as you can. Because she's from Pennsylvania. Nobody cares if you get anywhere.
Yeah.
And even out here, nobody cares if you get anywhere. She was impressed at.
And in that way, you could say you're making a good stereotype, which is okay. I mean, so our brains do this, though, where it's the only way that we can process our experience or our information. How do you know if a doctor is the one that you want to see for a certain procedure or for, let's say it's not just an emergency, but it's maybe a planned, like a knee, hip, something you can plan out. We talk to people and we try to process that information by the really good, surgically not so good bedside manner. And then we have to decide, which do I prefer? And then you stereotype, and then you start to make decisions. That's the only way you can navigate all that. On the other hand, when the doctor comes into you, who you've been told has really bad bedside manner, and you've now built this whole stereotype, you're already halfway down a path that may or may not be true. That she might do great with you that day, but you are going to be like, nope, can't be great because already has that stereotype. We're not open to the humanness of the person, or to the situation that they're going through when we're too dependent on. We have to be aware that our brain does this. I'm not telling you to stop doing it. sometimes we should stop doing it, though. Like racist, gender, ageist things we should limit. But we're going to keep doing these building categories. But we have to be mindful of when we're in the moment that we're dealing with humans and not categories. So I want to get this grounded into this text and then we can keep talking about it more and more. But I want to be careful to not go too long without reading this, because then we'll never even read the verses at all. So I don't want to do that. If someone would read 11 through 17, it's 1 John 3, 11 through 17. And yes, it is the same text we read last time.
I'll read it. For this is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person?
So the part that gets me onto the stereotype thing is that we use Cain as that. And it's safe to do that because no one's ever met Cain, and Cain's way back in the past, and we all know that he's the bad guy. And but we use Cain as this stereotype of evilness. There's all sorts of stories of people in our own world who, live or in a house with someone who's doing stuff that would be of the evil one. It's way harder than just be like, it's not like we can just get up in the morning and be like, well, our neighbor's Cain. This is really easy to decipher. When the Cain is the person next door, it may or may not be more complicated than this makes it sound. The thing that it's really trying to do is emphasize this loving each other. And it's trying to move us from, and where it says anyone who hates, it says, all who hate a brother or sister are murderers. Well, that's a bad one. That's a verse that should hit all of us. And I'm not trying to make eye contact and being like, you are bad people. Every single one of us has hated somebody, and we're going to say, no, we haven't, but has gotten upset about something and fallen into even 30 seconds of hate. Sometimes it's way longer than that. Of like, that person cut me off and I'm in hate of them right now. And we've done that. And it's saying that anyone who does that is the same as Cain, is of the evil one, is a murderer. What are we murdering? We're murdering their humanity. We're murdering their reputation, all sorts of things. This past Sunday in church, by the way, as church went, some of the things I told you in here last Thursday I was going to talk about, I did not.
I noticed that. I thought
It did not go well, and I'm not happy with it.
Talk to us in Bible
I'm not happy about it, how I did it, and I have a lot to learn from it. I rewrote the sermon as we were going. I mean, the service was just like coming at 100 different directions and had so many things going on that I was like, I need to take that story out, this story out, and I did, and it was all stuff we needed to do. So I took stories out, and then I wasn't happy with how the whole thing went because it was planned to have the whole stories in it. But one of the things that was still in there, for better or worse, was that I talked about I did this wolves thing, and the widow, I was talking about the widow from that text knows that she's in the midst of wolves, and she's going to be the widow anyway. She believes that God has given her the pennies, and the wolves are not going to let her give that to God the way she's called to do it. So I did the wolves thing. After church, someone who has visited here for many, many months and who I have never been able to catch or talk to or know their phone number or anything came up to me, and this is the longest conversation I've had with this person. I wish you wouldn't make a villain out of wolves. We're killing our wolves too fast, and when you talk about them like this, people are likely to hate wolves, and we need our wolves. And she's talking about the animal. And I'm like, oh crap, like this is the relationship now that I have, and I would have never wanted it to be that, right? I would have never wanted my relationship with anybody to be built on one choice that I made kind of maybe not well enough. So she's not, and I had to look at her and I had to say, you're not wrong. And I said, I talked some in the Preparing for Sunday and then in other places about the dangers of making characterizations, right? So I made a characterization of wolves, and she called me out on it. She's not wrong. Because big sweeping characterizations cut corners to try to say things, but the corners they cut might be the place where someone wanted you to spend time. This is both has this big generalization about Cain, and then jumps into saying, well, if anybody's hated, you're all been Cain. And so to me, it kind of dents this sweeping generalization that you can make. We're getting into here where we have a few minutes left. I don't want to leave it where it's just this theoretical thing. Where are places that we could do better at stereotyping less and connecting better? Saying that person voted this way, they are Cain. And stop jumping to that so quickly, and maybe more be like, well, I should at least sit with them before I figure out if they're Cain or not.
I don't ask anybody who they voted for.
Yeah,
Me either.
yeah.
Me either. I figure it's not my business.
Right.
However, I have had friends that said, if you vote for so-and-so, I will never, and I find out I will never be your friend.
Yeah.
So I am in a big hole.
I'm going to tell you that the
one of my
characterization thing is a thing.
That's a sad way to live.
I've struggled with the characterization thing of what it means to be a pastor for 30 years. And it's one of the reasons why I drug my feet to even become a pastor. Because it's unfair to Christ himself, and it's unfair to St. Stephen, and it's unfair to the ELCA, and it's unfair to my family, and it's unfair to everybody to what happens. It's unfair to St. Stephen, which means it's unfair to you. It's unfair to you to be like, well, John is the pastor, he did this thing, and so that's what pastors do, and that the humanity of a person has to be taken into account. I do not represent St. Stephen in everything that I say and do. And it's unfair because there have probably been times where you've been lumped in with things that I've said or done, whether you agree with it or not. Well, he did A or B or C, and that means that whole church supports that. And that doesn't mean that.
But there are people who do that, who will continue to do that until they seek to open their hearts.
They'll stop going
open
to the
their
church
minds.
because of
Right.
it.
You're right, they will, but the other part of it is that, yes, you're a murderer, but what's missing here is that through the love of Jesus Christ, we can be forgiven of that sin, which is murder. I agree. There have been people that I have had some difficult issues with, and I've tried to okay that and to make that better and to realize to be more open, but that comes with your journey of faith. And people who don't want a journey in faith will stick with that stereotype no matter what. That's my perspective, because I've changed a lot in my lifetime with my journey with Christ.
I think the journey with Christ and to be faithful and to be a person who's been baptized means a willingness. You're not going to stop making stereotypes. Let's face it. We all do it. You're never going to stop it. But it's a willingness to at least be aware that you do this, and be aware of sometimes sitting with the humanity of a person instead of doing it.
No,
So
God's there for everybody, though, not just, even if you think something, I think the actions are one thing, but even, like he says here, even if you think that within your heart, you are basically just as guilty, but I still love you.
Well, and what did Martin Luther say? Make certain that Christ is in the center of your heart, so that when those thoughts come in there and knock upon the door, I know you said it much better than I, then if you will then have that as the situation that's there. Of course, we're human. We're going to make those thoughts.
Absolutely.
But that is a part of society and a part that we have to deal with. And
Wait till
a
you
part
guys
that's
hit the
there.
Acme. Wait till you guys are in the Acme or whatever you do your grocery shopping at, and you're chatting with the person, and you're like, I just came from church, and you're like, well, oh, where? St. Stephen. I was just up at St. Stephen. Oh, that's the church that hates wolves.
What?
That's the church that hates wolves.
Only wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, and it's funny. It's sort of flippant to talk about the wolves part that way, but I mean that's the church that St. Michael, where I was prior to here, was absolutely petrified because the ELCA allowed for the ordination of openly gay people. When I go out in public, when I go out in public with my friends, they are going to say I support gay people, and I may or may not agree. And their anger wasn't that it happened. Their anger was the stereotype of now their friends are all going to assume a thing about them. We've been stereotyped and we've done it. Luther talks about the commandment of thou shalt not murder, and he adds a piece to it that makes it impossible to follow. So we forget this in the small catechism. We're like, oh, we're doing really well with the murder thing. To the best of my knowledge, I have not been involved in murder. I'm following this. So far today, I have not killed a person. So I'm doing, and I said so far, but I'm doing great. And then you open up the small catechism, and Luther takes a verse like this, and it says, incidentally, you have murdered if you've talked badly, if you've spoken badly of them. You've murdered them if you've talked about, they've not painted them in the best possible light.
Slandered their character.
Which we do incessantly.
Absolutely.
So now, all of a sudden, and he gets that from the Bible, by the way. He's not just making that stuff up. And it comes from places like this that say that. And so now, sometimes it's easier for us to hold the stereotype and be done. Faith asks us to be open to being deepened and deeper people. And that's scary and that's hard. And I heard what you all said about I don't talk to how people vote. I don't talk about voting. I heard you say that. Fine. But we do this with the voting thing where like that person voted for the person who is socialist, so they're socialist. That's okay, fine. And you don't have to like socialism. But I do think that we are called to, you can't do it 24/7 every minute of the day, not slander their character, not slander the and when we are like out mowing and it's like stop the mowing and we're talking now to the person, trying to look for the humanity instead of the stereotype. You can't do it all the time because God knows we only have so much energy left, and I get that. But to be open to that would go a long way in the world that we live in. We do it with kids. We say that kids' education is all test-based. Right? And schools these days are terrible, and they're not teaching them what they need. Well, then let's look for attaching ourselves as people of faith to the humanity of the kids that we're around. If we think the school hasn't taught things, then let's talk about with kids the things that we're hopeful that need filled in. All right, so we have to challenge ourselves at times to let God work deeper than the stereotype stuff. So anything else you all want to talk about with that? I'm going to actually hopefully move on to different texts next week. But that's a loaded thing, and that comes from this to me. And it's a challenge to me to just take a moment with people and sit with people and not just vilify or sanctify whoever I'm sitting with and be done. That's a hard call, but I think in there is our own sort of growth and our own sort of discipleship.
Sorry, I have to leave.
Nope, you're doing great. You're fine. It's that time anyway. You're doing great.
All right.
Be safe out
We'll be
there.
praying that it's all
That's right.
good news and everything goes good for you.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
I like that verse, by the way.
Yeah. I would